Hello, welcome everyone. We've got a great crowd today. So I know Catalina has a lot for us, so let's just get started and we will, I'm sure, have more joining us over the course of the hour. Good afternoon, everyone, or morning, or whatever, wherever you are. And welcome to the Open Ocean Fall 2020 seminar. My name is Dr. Katie Croft-Bell, and I'm the director of the Open Ocean Initiative at the MIT Media Lab. In case you missed our previous events, we've been doing these seminars more or less bi-weekly since the springtime. I'm putting a few links in the chat if you'd like to take a look at some of the past seminars. Most of them have been recorded and we get them up as quickly as we can post-seminar. So this fall, we are exploring access and equity in ocean science and recreation, and considering how those critical components translate to deep sea exploration. And one person who has been a huge influence and mentor to me over almost 20 years, I would like to introduce today's speaker, Catalina Martinez. She's the Regional Program Manager for the NOAA Office of Ocean Exploration and Research, and is currently on detail with the NOAA Office of Inclusion and Civil Rights. A certified diversity professional, Catalina began her ocean science career with NOAA in 2002, working on ship operations and logistics, as well as education and outreach initiatives for expeditions to explore little known and unknown ocean areas. Over the years, she has worked on a variety of local, regional, and national efforts to face the barriers to entry for underrepresented individuals in the STEM fields. So one of her areas of expertise is in understanding and breaking down the complex factors that can inhibit underrepresented scholars from entering these fields, especially student and early career opportunities such as internships and undergraduate research experiences. So today, we will explore some of the barriers to entry into such programs and share suggestions to mitigate barriers and diversify programs while creating a more holistic, equitable experience for all applicants. It's also going to be a very interactive experience, so don't expect to just sit back and listen. Kat will keep us on our toes. So please join me in welcoming Catalina Martinez, amazing human, wonderful friend, and fearless fighter for diversity and equity. Take it away, Kat.
Thank you so much, Katie. And what she didn't tell you is that she actually hired me back in 2002. She selected me as a Knaus Fellow, a John Knaus Marine Policy Fellowship, which is under the NOAA Sea Grant Office for those who are not familiar. Katie had that fellowship before I did, so she started in the ocean exploration program the first year that the ocean exploration program was stood up in NOAA, and then she brought me in year 2. I've been with them ever since. So these opportunities, as we know, and we're going to talk more about today, are gateways to employment. They're gateways to professional networks like no other. And so what I'd like to do first is I'm going to get you oriented to the fact that I have 2 screens going. So when I look in different directions, I'm sorry if it's a little awkward. NOAA doesn't use the Zoom platform very easily. So bear with me as I share my screen. So the first thing I always like to do is make sure that I follow Indigenous protocols, and I'd like to open our experience in this space with reverence and respect by acknowledging that I live on the traditional land of the Narragansett Nation in Rhode Island, and that the Narragansett people continue to thrive and prosper in this beautiful region of the country. And I'm incredibly honored to be speaking with you all today. And I want to specifically thank Katie Croft-Bell and MIT Media Lab for the invitation to participate in such a wonderful series. As she told you, I'm a regional program manager for NOAA's Office of Ocean Exploration and Research. I've been with NOAA now for 18 years, it's crazy. And beyond my ocean science and exploration work, I've been really fortunate to also work in the realm of justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Most of my life out of necessity, but also out of passion. And as Katie also told you, I'm currently doing a detail with NOAA's Office of Inclusion and Civil Rights at this critical time in our country, so that I can do this work more fully. And I'm really privileged to have been working from home since March, like many of you. And I hope that the topics that I'll address today might resonate with some of you in the audience. I'd like to first check in with folks. So what we're going to do is get you oriented to a poll everywhere software, where we are going to see how everyone is doing. So Katie is going to give you, if she hasn't already, the Poll Everywhere link in the chat so that we can work together in the software program. So what you'll end up doing is toggling between your webinar screen and a browser where you can put your answers. And I'll only do this a few times to you so we're not too awkward. But what I'd like to do now is just do a check-in. How's everyone doing? You know, these are extraordinarily challenging and stressful times. We're isolated and possibly traumatized by what might be playing out around us in our country, from the fires and floods to the social unrest and upcoming monumental election, right? To the global pandemic, to name just a few. And some of you might be frontline workers. You might be juggling small children, homeschooling, or caring for others while you're working at home during these stressful times, right? And others might be full of gratitude at your particular circumstances when you see all that is happening in the world. So I just like to do a check-in before I start having conversations these days, because although we can't be together in a space, which is, you know, something we all are missing right now, I want you to know that although I can't really see you, I can see a few little heads bobbing around the Zoom screen, but I want you to know that I hear you and I feel you, even if I can't see you. So know that we're here, we're thinking about all of you as we have these stressful, overwhelming, anxious times. But we're also hopeful, right, at this kind of a time in our lives. And I feel a ton of gratitude for my personal circumstances. I feel very, very fortunate, and I'm sure many of you do as well. So thank you for joining us with this polling software. So now I'm going to go back to my presentation. And I am particularly hopeful today with the group who are joining us today that we can agree on a few things by the end of this session. First, that diversity is essential for good science, and that it's only through deliberate thought and intentional actions that this can occur in our STEM spaces and places. There are things that we can do together to investigate and mitigate these barriers, and that's what we're going to talk about today. These barriers that might be in place in some of our processes and procedures, but also in our mindsets and our perceptions and our behaviors, the intangibles, right? And we can make a difference because more than anything, diversity is a choice or a series of choices. So let's go on a bit of a journey together. So it's often said that who your parents are has as much or more to do with where you will end up in life than any other single factor. And I really believe that. The social and economic structure a child is born into dictates access to our opportunities and to resources on all levels, including our quality of education and thus our future prospects, right? It carves out our identity and it determines this access as well as our chances for success. And as we're well aware, life circumstances are inherently unequal. And these inherent inequities are important to understand. They exist everywhere in the world, in our own country, even though we have the largest economy in the world, and even within our own communities. And we're seeing these inequities play out in real time in devastating ways with the pandemic and with groups that are disproportionately impacted by police violence. And we know that significant disparities exist in terms of educational achievement and economic status, and that no matter how the data is analyzed, that there's a strong correlation between these factors. So achievement in public education is absolutely not an equal opportunity experience. And it's pretty clear who the majority is, who's at the table with the power and influence to make the critical decisions and discoveries in the STEM world. There's no secrets here, right? And I could be up here all day showing you graph after graph representing the inequities and disparities in the world, but I won't do that to you. I think we all agree that inequities exist in every facet of life and that the chance of birth matters. And we know beyond a doubt that diversity is increasing in the United States and that it's projected, it's the marginalized racial and ethnic groups in the United States who are driving this growth, and that it's projected to continue into the future. And as we just established, race and poverty and educational achievement, among so many other factors, are inextricably linked. So although diversity is increasing in the United States, the face of STEM in America certainly is not. So the fact that this diversity is not represented in our STEM spaces, places, workforce, academic institutions, that's not surprising to any of us. And although we may envision ourselves in particular fields or doing particular things, if we're not represented in those spaces and places, it's really hard for us to get there, and even harder for us to believe that we can belong there. So even if we're one of the lucky few who does get there, do I really have a sense that I truly belong? And is that based on internal factors or the environment, or both? I personally believe that we need to get away from the term imposter syndrome and stop putting the onus on the individual. We all know that when we feel that we don't belong, it's typically because the environment, the culture, doesn't embrace us. And I would love to see a shift in this mindset and begin calling it what it is: imposter environment. And from the words of a great friend who I stole this slide from, the fish might be sick, but it could just be your water that's nasty, right? So what I'm really interested to know is if those of you participating today have ever felt that you don't belong in an academic or professional space or place. So I am going to go back to the poll. And I hope you'll join me. And let me know, have you ever felt that you don't belong? Yes, often, sometimes, rarely, no, or I own every space I'm in. So I hope you'll join me there. You know, what does belonging really mean to you? How does it feel when you belong, right? So what does this sense of belonging even mean? And how can that impact your academic or professional or life success, right? So what I'd like to do is go to an open-ended question. Now you can type in full sentences here. So what does belonging mean to you? That degree to which you might feel connected to a community, feel that you might have some kind of voice or power to shape the dynamic, the culture, the narrative that that particular community engages in on a daily basis. Do you feel valued and respected, right? Do you feel like you thrive there? Can you bring your whole sense of self? Can you contribute fully? Do you have equity in this space, equity of opportunities? That's right. You feel that you're being listened to and understood. You can be vulnerable there, right? You don't have the sense of fear that you don't belong. You feel embraced and encouraged. You may even have the emotional and intellectual bandwidth to be really creative and innovative there, right? It increases your health, your potential for leadership opportunities. It increases your earning potential. You might be able to speak up and be heard. You're more apt to maybe take on high value opportunities, leadership opportunities. You feel connected to the vision and mission of your coworkers, of the agency that you work for, of the institution. You start to build your identity within that space, and you're more apt to champion others, right? And bring others into the fold if you have that intellectual and emotional bandwidth because you feel that you belong. That's right. That's right. You feel heard. Thank you so much. And know that all of these answers are anonymous. And I thank you so much. You can keep sharing in that one. I'll keep that one open. So, you know, it's no surprise that if we feel a sense of belonging, that it's a happy, productive place where we can thrive, where we can share our successes, bring others in, and also an environment where we can start to really solidify our identities, our science identities or otherwise. And alternatively, when you don't feel that you belong, it's really difficult to find happiness and success, right? Much less potential to bring others in. We don't really have that bandwidth to demonstrate our greatness and contribute fully. You don't feel safe there. We might not feel that we can identify within that space. And ultimately, you have high attrition. And a team of scientists published this wonderful paper recently to really ground truth what we knew to be true about how belonging relates to persistence for students, and specifically women and students of color in STEM academic programs. Her key findings of that team were that sense of belonging significantly impacts persistence and success, particularly for students and women. No surprise there. Women experience a lower sense of belonging in comparison to men. And when race and gender intersected, because intersectionality matters, both men and women of color reported a lower sense of belonging. The dominant group, the white men, were most likely to report a sense of belonging, whereas women of color were least likely. So no surprise there. So what can we do to try and really bridge these enormous inherent historic gaps that we know exist in our STEM spaces and places? Well, especially thankful that over the past few decades, a lot of things have been tried. It's not a huge mystery how really to bridge these gaps. We've been having these conversations for decades. There are effective practices out there that we can learn from. And one of the direct ways we know to bridge these gaps is through development of student and early career opportunities as gateways to entry, including internships and fellowships and scholarships and undergraduate research experiences to help students start to really gain a foothold into what it means to do science early on. And the benefits to students are numerous. And they include gaining mentors and future career champions while they get to expand their professional networks, learning technical skills and applying academic training to real world problems while contributing to innovations and solutions within a team, assessing interest in particular fields while strengthening their resumes, and developing those hard and soft power skills, right, that contribute to career and life success, and gaining invaluable insight into organizational culture, structure, and function, while increasing potential for future employment within the agency. I'm in my 18th year, basically because I got in the door through the Knaus Fellowship. Thank you, Katie. And the students who complete these experiences are also more likely to apply for and receive other academic internships, fellowships, and scholarships. And what we know for sure is that experiential opportunities allow students to begin to develop their science identity and sense of social belonging within these fields, within these environments, which, as we just established, is critical for persistence within these fields. And then there are the long-term career and life benefits that aren't really well studied, but they're more students we have learned, and thankfully the Office of Education within NOAA did this incredible study a few years ago, and they just published it last year, so give a shout out to them. They're a team that I've been working with on these barriers efforts. We know that what happens when students participate in these experiences is they're more likely to publish in peer-reviewed journals. They're more likely to obtain graduate degrees and go into these programs. They're more likely to attain higher level jobs, which leads to increased earning potential, health and happiness, right? Resulting in these intangibles that increased health and happiness and broadening their worldviews, their vision of who they can become and where they belong. That impacts their identity. And all of this comes full circle when we get to positions of influence and power and use those positions to lift others up around us, right? In many instances, these benefits remain completely elusive for underrepresented students and scholars, as they are largely absent from a lot of these programs. So the daily realities for some underrepresented students and scholars on college campuses can be vastly different from those from the dominant groups for any number of reasons that we just discussed. As much of this can be tied back to those inherent gaps in the social, the economic, cultural, and political capital, right? And for these reasons, it often takes more effort and resources to reach them. So programs that are designed to bridge these gaps, they have to be targeted and deliberate, they have to be strategic, and they must be assessed for any potential to barriers to entry and inclusion on a regular basis. So with that in mind, I'm sure that many of you who joined us today have some familiarity with one or more internship, fellowship, or scholarship program. And some of what I just spoke about might resonate with you in terms of how these opportunities truly are gateways to career journeys like no other. And in terms of lack of diversity in many of these programs, right? So I'd like to share some of what I've learned over the past 5 or 6 years with a few of the programs that I've worked with to assess some of their processes and procedures for barriers. There are many different undergrad and grad programs within NOAA, but the two programs I have on the screen today are the NOAA Hollings Scholarship Program and the Educational Partnership Program Undergraduate Scholarship. So both are similar in structure in that students apply in their sophomore years, and if selected, they receive 2 years of funding for their junior and senior years of college, as well as federal internships during the summer. Life-changing, right? EPP is specific to minority serving institutions and actually provides 2 federal internships during summers. And as you can see by these photos, their funding mechanisms and their structure, they differ considerably. There are typically between 120 to 150 Hollings scholars selected each year as fundings based on appropriation levels. And EPP selects 8 students each year from minority serving institutions who are part of their program based on their mechanisms and funding formulas. The project I'll talk to you about today is an informal assessment that I conducted with the NOAA Office of Education team on barriers to entry for underrepresented scholars in the Hollings program. EPP's application processes are linked and identical, so students can choose to apply to one or both when they submit their applications if they attend MSIs. I focused on Hollings, but what we learned from this experience can and does translate across many other programs. So although I'll try to speak more generally when I talk about recommendations. So my particular journey into this work began with researching effective models to learn with those with practical experience, designing or revamping programs to recruit and serve diverse student groups well. There are certainly many successful programs of excellence out there. I started with one of the best models that I was familiar with, which is the Woods Hole Partnership Education Program. This program was designed specifically to select for and effectively serve and support a diverse body of students in a predominantly white community. As I'd been involved with this program pretty much from the beginning, I knew that they had a model that we should all learn from. I also learned from the National Science Foundation's Graduate Research Fellowship Program, the GRFP. As their former program manager, Giselle Mueller-Parker, she worked really hard to break down barriers and create a really incredible, inclusive model of success. So I interviewed the program leads for these 2 amazing programs, and I learned a ton. So what I'm showing you here are application components from the initial Hollings program at the time of our efforts. But in general, application processes and requirements are all pretty standard from what I've learned for federal and non-federal internship, fellowship, and scholarship programs. And there are really traditional rubrics that are usually used to quantify application segments. Applicants have to meet certain requirements up front in order to apply. And then they have to build a really competitive application, not easy, and submit transcripts, a letter of interest, 2 academic letters of reference, things like that. And the barriers that can occur can happen at any part of this process for any number of reasons. But the areas you most commonly can identify through assessing applicant flow data from the online process is that you see students who start, but who do not complete their applications. And when you start to really dig into this data, you can often see exactly where in that process they're falling out. And within the Hollings program, what we saw, which I've learned is very common, is that students don't hit send, and the place where they get stalled is often within those last 2 categories, the letters of reference and the essays. So in an effort to identify the barriers, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the process, because this is what we're talking about. You can bring this back and do this kind of, informal assessment. I am not some kind of assessment professional. I have my own personal lived experiences. I've been doing this work for a long time. I had personal interest. So I'm just an interloper. I'm not part of the Office of Education. People contact me to have these conversations, but I don't do this stuff, it's not a process that I developed on my own. It's just something that's relatively informal, but really impactful. So I'm just going to talk you through kind of what we did and what you can also do. So when we tried to identify the barriers, we figure in any program, it's really important to assess the entire process from beginning to end. When we started looking at it in piecemeal, you take things out of context and then you don't see the big picture and you don't know, where some other piece of what you think is missing might exist. So you really need to look at the entire process from beginning to end. So we broke it down into 6 components. We needed to ensure that we covered all bases, and we wanted to ultimately provide recommendations with the thought of staged implementation in these different areas over time. And I'll talk you through some of those key recommendations next. It's important to recognize that through an informal process like this, we really can only tackle those tangible components, right? The processes, the procedures, the documentation. So the barriers in those intangible arenas, they can remain. Those are much harder to quantify and assess. You can change as much policy and procedure as you want, but it can still be applied in a biased way if you're not bringing the hearts and minds of the deciders along with you, right? So what we know is through some previous studies, yes, but also just through personal experience over the past few years of bringing this conversation to a variety of national, regional, and local audiences, is that just by having these conversations, that there's potential to bring along those hearts and minds and really alter the perceptions and then the behaviors of those in positions of power and influence. And then you can really impact those intangibles. You increase the potential that those program managers, that the deciders, the gatekeepers, they go back to their institutions and programs and back into their daily work with maybe some new understanding of a variety of things they just didn't know before, right? So hopefully we have some people like that participating today. So let me share some of our recommendations. So first, it's really important to collect demographic data. I can't stress enough how important that is. It's not, you have to get permission. We're a federal agency. We had to go through a very formal process to do that. And as I said, Hollings was not collecting demographic data prior to 2017. Now they do. All of these data sets are imperfect data sets and they're voluntary, but it's all we've got. So I really hope that if you're not collecting these data sets yet, that you do. Try and get permission to do that. They're not perfect, but it's all you got. So, and I also implore you to really consider a more holistic review process. That's one by which all evidence and data are used to come up with a comprehensive assessment of the potential of an individual. Various factors like intellectual merit and broader impacts, those traditional rubrics, you might be able to weigh those things differently based on unique characteristics of each individual applicant if you just think more holistically. And there are many ways to build this into a process. So most of our recommendations took this into account. Targeted recruitment, that's critical. It's not something that everybody tends to do, although it makes sense, but it's critical to diversify the applicant pool. And you really have to ensure that students are applying from a broad range of academic institutions. Go out to community colleges and minority serving institutions, Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges, right? And it might be necessary to develop relationships with academic advisors at these particular institutions where the information tends to reside. Where is that direct connection with the students? And you can ensure that these recruitment efforts also reach students through conferences and other organizations that specifically serve underrepresented scholars, such as SACNAS, the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science, or ACES, American Indian Science and Engineering Society. There are many other venues as well. Proper guidance on the application requirements is also critical, as underrepresented scholars don't always receive the same level of grooming and guidance as their majority counterparts, and they may not be part of the same networks on campus. That is typical. There's a great need to develop guidance products to try and bridge these gaps. You can do things like host workshops at national conferences and maybe post short on-demand guidance videos on your website. And I know that NSF does those things really well. They've found real effective ways to do that. And we know that many more students start but don't complete their applications. So if you could figure out a way to identify those students early on, you could then maybe reach out to them and identify what the barriers are and try to bridge them on that front as well, right? Early intervention. And from the Hollings applicant flow data, it was clear that the expectation of 2 letters of recommendation from professors was a really steep ask. Imagine being a sophomore on a college campus where you might be falling through the cracks. You barely know who your academic advisor is. You're going into these 200-person enormous STEM classrooms like 101s. And somehow by the time you're a sophomore, you have this expectation for you to be competitive, that you've made good enough relationships with 2 professors on campus by then that you could ask for letters of recommendation. That's kind of a steep ask, especially if you're not receiving early intervention, grooming, and guidance to understand how important it is to build those relationships, right? So what we did is we worked with the team and the Office of Education to change that one requirement. So then they asked for 1 letter of recommendation from a professor, and then 1 from anyone else who could speak to that student's academic or career motivation. Could be a TA. They are the direct connection to the student often, right? A mentor, a supervisor, maybe someone they worked with over the summer. A lot of us have to work in the summer. We don't have the opportunity to go do these, experiential opportunities every summer if we don't make enough money. So something as basic as that might not seem like a barrier to someone who's had a really traditional life, or it's part of the dominant group, but it can make all the difference to someone who might be an outlier, right? So these are the types of things to just consider. And it goes without saying that something critical to a holistic review process is to ensure diversity in your reviewers and your panels. That seems so natural to me, but unfortunately, that effort is often missing. Program managers struggle to get enough reviewers. I hear this repeatedly, let alone have the time, the effort, or the resources to put into broadening their pool. And reviewer training and guidance is also essential, but it's also often lacking or not done very comprehensively. So we tried to really come up with some suggestions to try and build this in without it being such a huge lift for the program, such as, again, developing some on-demand guidance videos or adding more detailed written guidance to the documentation that you share with your reviewers or your panelists, right? We've worked on some of that as well. And then at the end, you can really get creative in your final selections to incorporate things like broadening participation into the outcomes. If you want a different outcome, you have to make different choices, right? And that final selection is an area where you can get creative. We also determined that it's really essential to provide constructive feedback to all applicants, not just those who are grouped into those high-level categories at the end. This, again, is sort of, bridging that grooming and guidance gap for these students. It helps them receive some guidance and feedback on how to develop a more competitive application the next time. And I've been really fortunate to have the opportunity to ground truth some of our findings through direct interactions with students and young professionals in a variety of settings, including at the UCLA Center for Diverse Leadership in Science, and through my residency with the Ocean Discovery Institute in San Diego last year. And there weren't any real surprises. There are lots of barriers based on inherent inequities that are not too difficult to identify if you have some of those lived experiences yourself. So there weren't any real surprises, but it was really, really rewarding to be able to talk with different groups and learn from them directly. And I have to say, it's been insane the past couple of years, really amazing. I've been able to experience some direct and then some not so direct impacts of sharing this information. I've had programs contact me from inside of NOAA, outside of NOAA. I can't keep up with the interest. They all want to consider the unique framework of their particular program, what their unique challenges are, because there can be very specific challenges based on your model, your frame, how you manage your program, where your funding comes from, what kind of control or lack of control do you have over making changes, right? And so they've had me speak to a variety of different groups to try and talk some of this through. Now, I've also had this amazing experience at the Ocean Sciences meeting. I can't believe it was only in February. Can you believe right after that we got locked down and I've been home ever since. But at the Ocean Sciences meeting, when we were all still able to gather together, I had multiple experiences with people I had never met before approach me and tell me that they had seen me talk at a conference or, or heard me speak during some event around this barriers work, and that they brought the information and the recommendations back to their home institutions. And I even had one person come up to me and tell me that they developed a brand new program with all the recommendations in place at the front end, right? And then the Office of Education team, out of a lot of the work we did together around Hollings, they created a Hollings prep program that is now in its second year. It was all based on the need to reach students early. So Hollings prep provides experiential opportunities for freshmen. Then you get them early, you get to groom them, you get to give them that guidance, you give them an experiential opportunity early, and they understand the importance of networking and building relationships, and all of those benefits we talked about start early for them. So I think it was very forward thinking of the Office of Education to do something like that. And it's heartening to know that having these conversations makes a difference, right? And I'm sure that there are people who are out there today who are on with us who have some semblance of influence or power or control, where these new considerations might just help mitigate barriers to entry into some new space or place. I just know it. So with all that said, did we get here? Can we agree on these two very basic notions? That diversity is essential, and that it's a choice or a series of conscious decisions to do things differently. First, we have to accept that it will take more effort and resources and a great deal of commitment to reach groups we have yet to reach. That is absolutely true. And that all efforts really have to begin with honest conversations, and that's scary, I know. But let's do it anyway. Walk towards your discomfort. With all that's happening in the world, if we are not uncomfortable yet, then it's beyond time to get there. Look around you. Who's not at the table? Who's not walking through the door? Who's missing from your orbit of influence and power? What perspectives are not being considered? What brilliance and innovation and ideas and solutions are we completely missing out on? How can we expect to be public servants when we don't represent the demographic of the public we serve? So to wrap this up, this year's most honest national reckoning around systemic inequities and disparities in the United States may have a twisted silver lining. I recently heard the term productive apocalypse to describe how this elevated national consciousness may be just the catalyst needed to truly reimagine a more equitable world moving forward. Whether this results in a wave of change remains to be seen, but I am cautiously optimistic given what I've experienced over the past few months. My hope is that those of you who decided to join us for this conversation today intend to participate in this reimagining. And maybe we go one step further and have as our ultimate goal, justice. So let's be deliberate and renew our commitment to break down the barriers, to elevate and amplify the voices of the marginalized, and champion students and scholars from groups who remain so sorely underrepresented, so they lead us on this new journey. I have hope, and I truly believe that through collective will, we can ensure that the next generation of STEM professionals fully represent the increasingly diverse demographic of the US at large. None of this will be easy, and it certainly won't happen overnight, but it really does begin with a choice. Thank you.